What would you do? What would you do if you were a recent divorcee and a man came on to you, a married man, friend of your family, knows your children, your kids know their kids, you know that man's parents, he knows your parents, but as soon as you're divorced and I guess vulnerable, that man preys upon you. That man says, next time I won't be as, kind and gentle. Because the first time he pushes himself on you, but then, you freeze. You're like, what? What is going on here? And you manage to say no or stop, but you don't protest to the level that you feel. Because you're like, wait a minute, where is this coming from? Why do you think that I'm available to you? And why do you think you can put your hands on it? So, what would you do if you were going on a job market and in intimate situations, this is how men felt about women's bodies? And in the workplace, you can imagine that it can be very difficult, very difficult. I know of many women who have talked about facing sexual harassment here in India in the workplace. And it's such a common sort of trauma in a sense, and I do call it trauma. Although I know that a lot of people might have difficulty with labeling these little minute behaviors as traumatic. I think they build and build and build and build and build until you have someone who was the eventual subject of the conversation that I had with my friend who told me about the situation of being harassed, facing it also different workspaces. And it's that, what do you do when other women betray the sacredness of women, of other women's bodies by hating, just being hateful, angry, nasty, worse than men, except that maybe they don't do it sexually, they do it other ways to undermine each other. This is not a new thing to talk about the difficulty of feminine solidarity. But I think we have to realize we're not just talking about feminine solidarity, we're talking about feminine solidarity in a specific context. And without looking at the context, when we basically say, well, there's no responsibility, women have to deal with it on their own. Well, I'm sorry, sweetie, but, women aren't here by themselves. Women didn't create the planet, or didn't create the planet. Women didn't create our world by themselves. We did this together. And I really tried to reach out to this friend, and so I thought of some words, and a lot of it came from my readings of bell hooks, and so I'll share a little bit with you, and then I'll talk a little bit more about what would you do facing the situation. Because a lot of people really, they can talk about this stuff in theory, but when you gotta put food on your plate, when you have to feed mouths, and then this kind of stuff comes through, it's a little different. At least I think so, you know what I'm saying? So, in All About Love, in the chapter Healing, Redemptive Love, Bell Hooks said, more than our pain, our self-destructive, self-betraying behavior trapped us in the traumas of childhood. We comfort ourselves by acting out, but this comfort did not last. It was usually followed by depression and overwhelming grief. And so what I would say is that the women who learn to adopt, when we talk about this, again, in theory, but I don't want to go into detail with just talking about, adopting the hard, the man code, putting on the pants, wearing both pants. But this, it is this. Think about it. When I was describing that scene, and many people who've been sexually assaulted would talk about a point of being frozen. They were not helpless. at least not in their minds. Their spirits weren't conquered. But it was such a traumatic, surprising, shocking, overwhelming, overpowering situation, so traumatic that they froze. Now, the person I know who faces the situation refuses to freeze next time, or that there be such a next time. Um, what I would offer is what Bell Hooks has offered here. Think about that. Trapped us in the trauma. So here you have people who are trapped in that moment of trauma, that helplessness, that powerlessness. You know what they do? They pick on the first person who looks like them. And they say, I'm going to switch this up. I'm going to victimize you. Now, this is all funny. Now that this is coming out in the time of Tom Burrell's book, The Myth of Black Inferiorization. Because it's a way of inverting power. And that it's on the axis of gender, on the axis of race, on the axis of class, is neither here nor there. But it's this basic idea of inverting power. So when you have people, when you have homicide, when you have, femicide, women who just can't see good in other women, who see women as competition for that man, for the attention. And see, this is what is important, and this is what my friend had to point out, is that it's that they want to identify with the person that's powerful, right? So they try to imitate them, but what they end up doing is mocking them, because there is this fundamental fear, trauma. For them, it's a trauma. They're stuck in that trauma. So when they reenact that trauma, it's coming from not even a space of power, but even still from a space of powerlessness. And so you usually followed by depression and overwhelming grief. These are people who don't find happiness in their lives. Like I said, I've said that they hate other women. Black people who just hate other black people. They just find a reason. All that, Negroes just blah, 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 blah. It just never will be good enough. You know why? Because the man or woman in the mirror is not good enough. And if the man or woman in the mirror is not good enough, then there will be no solidarity, because you will not see that you have anything in common with anyone in your situation, because you will just hate them. On the next page, Bell Hooks says, life without communion and love with others would be less fulfilling, no matter the extent of one's self-love. So you can, profess and protest that you love and adore yourself, chain yourself up with bling, 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 with the paraphernalia of oppression. Doll yourself up so that you look pretty, so that you're the one that when that man wants attention, that you're going to give it to him, and not that happen. So you don't want her to get a job, you don't want her to enter school, you don't want her to succeed in your classes. You want to make sure it's tough for her, because you're a tough cookie. If you ain't produced, why shouldn't she? And for a lot of people, that is equally as traumatic as being assaulted. It is a form of sexual assault. In fact, I would call it emotional sexual abuse that women do to each other, sexually harassing each other, saying, I'm going to hate you. Please, for people who are whose skulls are thick, of course I'm not talking about all of that. I'm talking about I'm talking about self-hating. And if it's not you, then I'm not talking about you, but I know you know somebody like that.